Hey y'all. In the 1960s, an Appalachian cryptid sighting swept the U.S. It's doubtful that anyone anticipated the pop culture phenomenon that would stem from these stories, but even more surprising is that the sightings continue in another region of the United States. I'm Candace, and I'll be your guide. On November 12, 1966, 5 men were digging a grave in Clendenin, West Virginia, when they spotted what seemed to be a brown humanoid figure flying overhead, moving from tree to tree. Just 4 days later, 2 couples were out for a date. The Scarberrys and the Millettes were in Roger Scarberry's car, leaving the TNT area of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The TNT area was a decommissioned explosives and munitions storage area that had been in use during World War II. As they drove, the couple spotted a 6 to 7 feet tall, white figure standing near the roadside. The figure had large wings and glowing red eyes. It seemed skittish around the vehicle's headlights, and the couples noted that it moved somewhat clumsily. Well, that is, until it took flight. Terrified, they drove away quickly, with their 57 Chevy reaching speeds of 100 miles an hour. The winged cryptid pursued them, making a screeching sound all the way to the Point Pleasant city limits where it gave up the pursuit. The couples were so shaken that they immediately reported the incident to the police, although they knew it would be difficult to be taken seriously. The police investigated the area but were unable to find whatever it was that the couples had seen. The following day, the local newspaper, the Point Pleasant Register, published an article about the experience which they titled, "Couples See Man-Sized Bird, Creature, Something." Following the article, there were a couple more brief sightings in the Point Pleasant area, with one witness describing it as a quote-unquote large bird with red eyes. Another witness states that he shined a flashlight at a shadowy figure in a field and found its eyes to glow red like bicycle reflectors. This same witness blamed some TV static that evening, as well as the disappearance of his German shepherd, on the mysterious creature. After the local newspaper's report, other press outlets followed suit, and soon the winged creature had an official nickname, the Mothman. Sightings of Mothman throughout West Virginia and the nearby area continued sporadically throughout the following year, until finally, on December 15, 1967, catastrophe struck the town of Point Pleasant. The Silver Bridge, which gained its name from the shiny aluminum paint coating it, suffered a minute flaw in one suspension eye bar, only 2.5 millimeters deep. This tiny defect caused the Silver Bridge to collapse under the weight of rush hour traffic, plunging 46 people to their death in the freezing Ohio River. Later analysis of the bridge remnants by engineers determined that the bridge had been carrying much heavier loads than it had been designed for, as well as not receiving appropriate maintenance over the years. Despite the very logical explanation, it didn't take long for the reports and rumors to start flowing in. Several people claimed that they had spotted the Mothman, either perched upon the suspension structure of the Silver Bridge or nearby the bridge, in the days and hours leading up to the collapse. Mothman proved to be an oddly easy scapegoat for West Virginians who were upset about the tragedy. Many believed that Mothman himself caused the collapse of the bridge. Many others instead believed that Mothman is a harbinger of catastrophic events and disaster. Following the bridge collapse, it seems that Mothman just disappeared. All sightings in the Appalachian region ceased from that moment. In 1975, author John Keel introduced the Mothman to the mainstream with his novel, The Mothman Prophecies. The novel is rife with speculation and supernatural theories on the origin of the Mothman, venturing into pseudoscience. The subsequent 2002 movies starring Hollywood big names Richard Gere and Laura Linney only took this premise further, exaggerating the Mothman sightings and experiences in that way that only Hollywood can. Following the massive success of the movie and the transformation from local cryptid to pop culture phenomenon, Point Pleasant hired a local artisan to erect a stainless steel Mothman statue in the downtown area. Soon after, the Mothman Museum followed suit, memorializing the year-long wave of sightings throughout West Virginia. For the average Joe, this is where the story ends. A couple of noteworthy sightings and articles, a bridge collapse, a whole lot of rumors, and a cool statue. But there's so much more to this story than what happened in Point Pleasant. And in my opinion, the deeper dive is far more interesting. With that, I'd like to take y'all on a little journey veering away from Appalachia, following the stories of the Mothman over to the greater Chicago area. You see, when the elusive cryptid vanished from Appalachia, the sightings around Lake Michigan began, and they're still occurring to this day. Regular sightings of the Mothman in the Chicago area began in 1969, 2 years following the collapse of the Silver Bridge in West Virginia. The Singular 14 Society website has been keeping track of sightings that have been reported to them over the years, or archived over time. So bear in mind, although there are dozens of reported sightings, these are only the ones where the witnesses have come forward to report their experiences. Most of the Mothman sightings that have been archived were brief experiences that fit the formula, so to speak. A large humanoid, dark in color or black, with glowing eyes that were typically said to be red but occasionally were yellow or orange. The creature was always said to have large wings and was seen taking flight. But some of the stories? Well, I'll just relay a few of them to you. Floyd Hancock was living in Rolling Prairie, Indiana, when he had far too close of an encounter with the Mothman in 1969. Floyd explains that he was living in a mobile home with his parents, his grandmother, and his baby sister at the time. The trailer had some roof damage, and a tarp was covering a gaping hole in the roof of the living room at that time. In the middle of the night, Floyd was awakened to a strange sound and a foul odor in the room he shared with his baby sister. He awakened to see a tall, winged humanoid creature staring down at his baby sister in her crib. The monster slowly turned its head to look at Floyd, who was terror-stricken. The creature was large, 7 to 8 feet tall, with a face and body covered in black hair and huge leathery wings like those of a bat. Its body and face were thin, but its limbs were muscular. It stood in a partial crouch and made low, garbled sounds. This iteration of the Mothman had dark eyes. Floyd screamed, but his parents never heard him. His grandmother did, however, and rushed to the doorway of the bedroom, only to be so shocked that she fell to her knees. The winged creature then picked Floyd up, made its way to the living room where the hole in the ceiling was, and flew upward with the child in his arms. Floyd vividly remembers noticing that the tarp had been moved to the side, exposing the hole in the roof. He recalls being wet, cold, and crying for his parents as he heard his grandmother screaming from inside the house as they soared upward into the sky. He doesn't recall anything between that moment and waking up in his bed at some future point with his worried family surrounding his bed. His grandmother had indeed witnessed the entire event and documented it, making sure to recount it to living family members before her passing in 1985. After the creature had left the home with Floyd, his parents awakened. They later felt that they had been placed in some sort of hypnotic state that prevented them from intervening during the abduction. Several minutes after exiting with the child, the family heard loud scratching noises, then a thud on the roof. Floyd's father immediately climbed onto the roof to see his child lying there, unconscious in the rain. They quickly brought him inside, dried him off, and tucked him into bed. The family was reluctant to report the event or to seek any medical help because it was all just so bizarre and unexplainable. Floyd was physically fine, but has exhibited signs of PTSD his entire life. He tried to watch the Mothman movie in the theater, but suffered a quote-unquote mental breakdown and had to leave during it. He does, however, admit to being relieved and feeling really validated that there are other people spotting the same creature that he had such a close experience with. In 1981, a 13-year-old boy had developed a method of meditation that helped him cope with terrible abuse suffered at the hands of his parents. He typically spent his evenings in his backyard, escaping through his mind in this way. One evening, during his usual meditations, he felt himself enter a state of spiritual awareness that was deeper and somehow more aware of the spiritual plane than he felt was typical for him. After a while, he felt like he was being watched and pulled himself from his meditative state to see two glowing red eyes watching him from across the alleyway. The boy noted that compared to his neighbor's 4 feet tall chain link fence, this being must have been about 7 feet tall, black and thin with long wings that extended over its narrow head. But those eyes, they were so hypnotic and consuming that the boy just couldn't pull his eyes away. He explains that he felt the creature used its stare to hold his attention. The witness felt a range of emotions that varied from tranquility to absolute terror as they stared at one another. He recognized that he was definitely not in a reflective or meditative state anymore. This was real, and this creature was in front of him. He felt that this moment changed his understanding of the world forever. Another witness, Billy, was a truck driver with a large carrier company in Chicago. He stopped at Alpha Baking, a commercial-scale bakery in Chicago, to pick up a loaf of bread. When he stepped out of his truck, he noticed a flying object in the sky coming from the direction of Midway Airport. He said it looked like a man with wings, like Batman. He feels that the creature may be a secret government project. Of note, 3 other people were in the area who witnessed this creature flying overhead with Billy. What makes Billy's story unique, however, is he feels that the Mothman sighting spurred a series of unexplained medical conditions. Billy explains that he has pressure behind his eyes that defies medical explanation despite extensive testing with MRI and lumbar puncture. Billy's mother apparently passed away unexpectedly 3 weeks prior without many answers. While it's noted that Billy provided plenty of documentation and evidence about these medical issues to Singular 14, they were not made publicly available. One family feels that they had a closer experience with the Mothman than many. They kept a record of a comprehensive timeline of their sightings and experience with the cryptid that numbered approximately 30 sightings over 47 years. This family believes the creature is a shapeshifter that takes various forms. However, the forms they describe are only subtly different from one another, such as a small difference in height, color, or facial structure. The family notes that it perches up high in the shadows and has been inside several homes they've lived in, ranging from the area around Lake Michigan and throughout Appalachia from West Virginia down to Tennessee. They explain the creature hates dogs and has a musty odor that often announces its presence. While living in Chicago, the witness explains that the cryptid lived in an abandoned warehouse next door to their family and followed them when they moved from home to home. My favorite of these personal encounters is heavily redacted to protect the privacy of the witness. As the story proceeds, you'll understand why. For now, I'm going to fill in the blanks a little bit to help make the experience easier to relay to you. So bear in mind that the witness's name, details of her location in the city, and her profession are just placeholders in this story. Katie hesitantly wrote in to share her experience after being unable to mentally sort out a strange experience that she had near her home in Rosemont, Illinois. She's lived there most of her life and works in a nearby suburb. One of Katie's favorite parts about living where she does is going to a nearby park to get in touch with nature and sit near a nice statue and a little waterfall, particularly on her nightly walks that she often takes to wind down for the evening. On this particular night, she was having trouble sleeping and decided that a short walk was in order. She tossed on a jacket and walked to the park nearby to sit in the cold for a little bit in hopes of bringing on some sleep later. Tonight, though, things seemed different. Despite the two highways nearby, things were quieter than usual. She recalls that things just felt off. Katie sat down at her usual spot near the statue and hadn't been there more than a few minutes before she spotted a very tall man standing near the waterfall. She states that he isn't just tall, but very unusually tall and very thin. The tall man was standing next to a smaller man who was equally as thin, with a head that seemed disproportionately sized to his body. The two seemed to be conversing amongst themselves, but Katie was sitting too far away from them to hear what they were saying. As she watches the exchange, a pair of women start to approach the men, but those women seemed hypnotized or dazed. As the women approached, the tall man unfurled a gigantic set of wings momentarily before tucking them back in. Then, the smaller man turned to the two women, and abruptly, the area was bathed in a very bright blue light that lasted 1 to 2 seconds. When the light dissipated, everyone had vanished except the tall, winged creature. Katie watched him turn from the waterfall, unfurl his wings again, and take a couple of steps as he began to take flight. She describes that he flew away lowly, heavily, akin to a goose taking flight. She sat there too stunned to move for a few minutes, terrified of the walk back to her apartment. Finally, she ran home, finding safety behind her locked door. She feels strongly that she was in the wrong place at the wrong time and was definitely never meant to see what she saw. From that moment, she was fearful that she'd been noticed at the park that night. Beginning the night following the encounter, Katie had a series of very vivid, repetitive dreams. 4 times she dreamt of being in a brightly lit room. A voice was telling her that she was going to be fine, and then a quote-unquote hand reaches over, touches her arm, and everything goes black before she awakens. I should note, she put the word hand in quotation marks in her correspondence. The day following the singular 14 investigators speaking with Katie, she follows up to let them know of an alarming occurrence that happened during her lunch break at work. During lunch, she went to throw away trash from her meal when a man approached her claiming to be an investigator and stating that he just wanted to discuss what she'd seen. The following is a direct quote from Katie. Quote, "I asked him with what organization he was with and how did he know who I was. The gentleman only answered that he was an investigator and that it was imperative that I speak with him about what I saw. The man gave me a very bad vibe and I did not want to speak to him. My coworker who was with me had gone to the bathroom, and this is when the gentleman approached me and insisted that I talk to him. I told him that I'd already spoken with the investigators and again asked him who he represented. and he only answered again that he was an investigator. My friend returned from the bathroom, and the man walked away without another word. This incident kind of shook me up and left me with even more questions than before. By any chance, did any of you send an investigator to speak with me? And how did you know where I was going to be for lunch? I'm more than willing to talk, but being approached in such a way in public and out of the blue just does not jive with me. I've had instances in the past where I've been stalked by an obsessive ex-boyfriend, and it left me traumatized and a little jumpy to have someone approaching me out of the blue and insistently asking me to speak with him. Kind of raised a lot of red flags for me." Unquote. The two investigators that Katie had been working with both assured her that they had never discussed her experience with anyone aside from one another. They had no idea who this man was. Unfortunately, this encounter understandably spooked Katie, who was reluctant to speak further with investigators. After numerous attempts, she finally got back to them with the following, quote, "Thank you for getting back to me, and I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I do not want to talk about this anymore. All sorts of strange things have been happening to me since the day that gentleman tried to talk to me. I have been plagued by numerous calls. When I pick up, I hear nothing on the other side. I also have been followed, and I've had people who do not belong in my neighborhood or at my job sitting there watching me. All this started after I had this sighting. I don't know what it was that I saw, but apparently I was not meant to see it, and now I'm scared something's going to happen to me. I've even considered purchasing a handgun just to protect myself. I'm not crazy, and I know what I saw was real. I saw it with my own two eyes, but now I'm being stalked and have people coming up to me and asking questions who I don't even know. And now people are calling and trying to intimidate me, and frankly, it's working. I've had little sleep since this has happened, and my nerves are completely frazzled. I can't do this anymore. I don't care if people don't believe me or think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw, and now it seems like people want me to keep my mouth shut, or they want to probe into what and who I am because of this incident. I know you probably get hundreds of reports daily dealing with all kinds of paranormal stuff, and I'm just one person who saw one incident. But apparently it stirred up a hornet's nest, and now I'm caught in the middle. It's nothing against you, but I'm scared, and I want this to stop." Unquote. Katie did reach out one more final time to tell them that the vivid dreams have continued. And in the dreams, now she's able to see that the shorter man she saw looks like a classic gray alien. In the dreams, he tells her, quote, "Everything is going to be fine, and that you are perfectly safe and will be spared." Unquote. She goes on to mention again that she is fearful for her safety and the safety of her family and loved ones following this encounter. Hence why the investigators redacted so many of her personal details in an attempt to protect Katie's safety and privacy. Again, these were just a few stories of the various encounters people have had with Mothman in the years following the initial Point Pleasant sighting. Theories surrounding the Mothman range from conspiratorial to supernatural. Many believed he is an escaped government experiment or a mutant grown from exposure to nuclear radiation. These theories almost certainly stem from the initial sighting of Mothman near the TNT area. The other leading theory is that Mothman himself is an extraterrestrial. People point to an uptick of UFO sightings in the approximate years and areas of the Mothman sightings. Some believe that a Shawnee chief who'd been murdered by Americans in the past area of Point Pleasant may have cursed the land, creating the Mothman. Although it seems that this theory has fallen out of favor over time. Some believe he's an angel or a messenger sent by God to warn humanity of its downfall. The skeptical answer, however, is simple. Sandhill cranes. These birds are massive, with a wingspan of up to 6.5 feet or 2 meters wide. The red area on their heads around their eyes are said to be mistaken for the glowing red eyes of Mothman. Indeed, the occasional rare photograph submitted and said to be the Mothman are usually debunked as a large bird, sometimes with prey in its talons. Those who believe in the prophetical nature of the Mothman claim that he has been spotted at numerous historical events and disasters over the decades. At the 1999 bombing of a Russian apartment complex, Chernobyl, the Twin Towers on 9/11, etc. It seems these sightings are always mentioned retroactively. Although some claim he was spotted prior to the actual event, they just didn't come forward until afterward. Therefore, any reputable sources for the prophecies, or sources at all for that matter, aren't obtainable. There are many who believe that the Chicago area, or rather the entire area around Lake Michigan, is in for a hell of a disaster at some point. For most people, the Mothman is a pop culture king who draws large crowds at annual festivals and has quirky merchandise. But now, we know that there is far more to his story and to his mystery. Okay, y'all, that's the story of the Mothman. Let's talk about it. Before I get any further, let me tell you, I am sick again. So I'm very sorry if I sound like a frog, but this episode was too important to me to do some filler in between just because I'm sick. To be honest, I initially dreaded the story because the whole Point Pleasant Mothman thing it's not my speed. You know, the whole pop culture following, it's honestly cheesy in that way that is really fun if you're on a road trip and looking at the ridiculous and cheesy things, but on the day-to-day, not my thing. Until I did a Patreon episode focusing on the mysteries of Chicago's O'Hare Airport, which there are many. That was such a fun episode to do. But there are 3 Mothman encounters in the airport that were featured in that episode, among other stories. And those lured me in. I was blown away by how much more there was to know besides the Point Pleasant Mothman. People aren't talking about all the Chicago area sightings in the mainstream. The paranormal community knows about them, but the average person or average woman who thinks Mothman is lame and dumb hasn't really heard about all the Chicago ones, so I was delighted to find all of that. I waffled on taking the story out of Appalachia in this way. And by the way, thank you to everyone who supported me on the Facebook page for the departure. But I could not tell the details of these Chicago experiences because holy crap. These stories are incredible to me. And I know it's hard to determine how reputable any of this is without names for the most part and any evidence. You know, there's no hard evidence in any of this. But I also can't help but feel like the witnesses in these experiences don't seem to be looking for notoriety. They largely just wanted to stay anonymous, and some even struggled to protect their privacy. So basically, I trust these stories as much as they can be trusted. Like Floyd, who got abducted. Grandma saw the whole thing, which I love that detail. And it's amazing that she documented it well and told everyone that she knew in order to keep that tale alive after she was gone. I also don't know, as a parent or grandparent, how you ever sleep at night after Mothman abducts your child. Anyhow, it seems like Mothman wanted the baby, but changed his mind to Floyd after he spotted him. Why did he take him? Especially if he was only going to keep him a few minutes. It seems like during that time he dazed him like he did the parents. Okay, to go off the conspiratorial deep end for the moment, and I don't usually do this, so don't hold it against me, but the fact that I believe this story that a Mothman abducted a child, even just briefly, It makes me question how many babies or kids that have been abducted from their rooms without any evidence could be victim to something absolutely unexplained like this. It's something I never considered until these stories. It's easy to say, oh, clearly it's the parents, or oh, clearly it's the maintenance man who was there earlier that day, but no one considers a cryptid stealing your child in the middle of the night. At least I never have. Billy, the truck driver who had the brief sighting and then had the unexplained eye issues, I really don't know if there's much stock in that. Clearly, medical mysteries are not that uncommon. And I've heard rumor of brief mention of eye issues after Mothman sightings, but it seems like that was mentioned in the movie, and I couldn't find any actual experiences of that happening. But as I mentioned, that movie is highly dramatized. Now, that one family that had about 30 Mothman sightings, their timeline is really thorough and interesting. Like, it's cool to see it broken down like that and read the individual experiences. But I'm sorry, I don't buy it at all. It followed them from home to home. It hangs out in their house, multiple houses. And when I say it's a family, through context clues in their report, it seems like its stories passed through an extended family. Like cousin A saw it here, and then Aunt B saw it here, kind of deal. So not a small family. It's many people claiming to have all seen him. But Katie's story has me hooked. It's so enthralling. It is easy to say that the extent of her anonymity and how redacted the information is could discredit her story. But if it really happened the way she explains, anyone would be fearful for their safety. I think anyone else would have it removed completely, it being the report of the encounter. Between Floyd's abduction story and Katie's experience, they both reinforce the idea of Mothman being able to hypnotize or entrance or maybe even mind control people for a while. I'm so curious what happened to the two women that Katie saw vanish, with what she later realizes is your stereotypical gray alien. And the alien being present with the Mothman, does that confirm that he's also an extraterrestrial being, meaning Mothman? I mean, it seems like pretty decent confirmation to me. Now, I realize, as a skeptic, this all sounds like total lunacy. Talking about some of these stories this way as if they absolutely happened in the way the person claimed. Yeah, it's making me cringe a little bit. But I can't help it. I believe them. I definitely believe Floyd's story and Katie's story anyhow. And even if I didn't, there's an excellent map of the Mothman sightings around the Chicago area. And they're so concentrated and so numerous that it's convincing. I'll make sure to upload a screenshot of the map onto the podcast social media pages as well as linking it in the show notes for you to see, because it is worth checking out. It's really interesting. So despite my potentially silly belief in these stories, of course we need to talk about the logical conclusion. The logical conclusion would be mass hysteria. Mass hysteria occurs when basically panic spreads from one person to another person in an area. It can be really powerful and incredibly convincing and really take hold of a pretty large group of people. So if you've got everyone in an area on edge about a rumored sighting, then all it would take is potentially seeing a sandhill crane and boom, you've got Mothman. Of course, this theory doesn't account so well for the more detailed stories I covered, but it absolutely could for the more mundane encounters. As was probably pretty clear from my description of events, I did not read John Keel's book nor watch the Mothman movie. Normally, I like to consume everything I can for an episode, but the reviews were pretty unanimous that Keel takes whatever evidence or reports he had and would just traipse off into speculation over them within the same sentence. So my concern was being unable to differentiate the facts available versus his theories and speculation and incorrectly report those to you as truth. The movie is so fictionalized, there's very little remaining of the original Mothman story anyhow, especially given how short those original Point Pleasant sightings were. As always, I want to know what you think. Do you buy these stories I've mentioned today? If so, the better question is, where do you think Mothman came from? That's the piece of this that I can't even begin to speculate on without getting overwhelmed with the endless possibilities here. You can find me on social media under Obscure Appalachia or email me at obscureappalachia@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the podcast and get bonus episodes like that O'Hare Airport episode I mentioned, go to patreon.com/obscureappalachia. These episodes are very labor intensive to produce, and I do every little bit of it solo. So my patrons allow me to not have to cover all of the hosting and software fees on my own, and it's so appreciated. Either way, let's chat about the Mothman. I love hearing from all of you. Thanks, y'all. Until next time.